Okay, guys, here we go. Let me hit present here. All right. So I wanted to just take some time, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get in the way just a little bit on some of this. A couple of things I just want to make sure that I slow things down and walk you through here with 10.1 and 10.2. Okay. I know that you got this on your own, but I just want to, pretend like we're in school here and just help out because I know this can be a little bit confusing. So we have two different types of court cases in the United States. We have criminal court and we have civil court, okay? And in a criminal case, where it's when somebody has broken the law, right? The court is going to determine innocence or guilt, and then if guilty, what the punishment would be. We have the prosecution that represents the people. That's who brings a case to court. That's representing the government. So it would be like it was the people of California versus O.J. Simpson. A defendant is the individual that is charged with breaking the law. The other type of case is called a civil case, right? And this involves a dispute, right? This involves a plaintiff that brings a complaint. The defendant is the individual or group, or in some cases the government, that is responding to a complaint. This does not involve breaking a law in terms of like somebody being prosecuted with jail time, but it's trying to settle some sort of dispute, and it almost always involves money or property. Now, in Pennsylvania, you can be charged here. I'm going to get in the way here. No, I'm going to have a hard time fitting here early. But you can be charged with either a felony, a misdemeanor, or a summary offense. These are the types of criminal charges that can be brought, right? And every state, remember we talked about federalism, right? This awesome thing in America, dual sovereignty, where we've got a federal government, we have a federal court system. Well, we also have a state government and a state court system. We'll talk about the difference between federal and state court in just a little bit. And in Pennsylvania, the different things that you can be charged with in criminal court are felony murder, a first degree, second degree, or third degree felony, a first degree, second degree, or third degree misdemeanor, or a summary offense, right? And every state is completely different on this. In fact, Pennsylvania is one of 3 states that has something called third degree murder. First degree murder is when it's premeditated with an intent. That can be even the death penalty or life without parole. Second degree murder is murder when you are in the act of committing a felony, like I'm robbing a bank and shot somebody. That would be second degree murder. That's life imprisonment. Third degree murder is when you're committing any other crime except for the ones that are listed in second degree murder, which are pretty much all of your felonies. It's super confusing, but basically just think about if something is premeditated, it's first degree. If you kill someone while you're committing another crime, it is almost always second degree murder. When we talk about first degree felonies, let me move myself down here a little bit. You can get between 10 to 20 years in prison and a fine of up to $25,000. This is like voluntary manslaughter. So when there's a death that occurs and it's not first degree premeditated murder or second degree murder in the act of committing another crime, but your actions result in somebody's death, there's voluntary and involuntary manslaughter. So voluntary manslaughter would be like a fight started and somebody just pulled out a gun and shot somebody. That would be voluntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter would be like if you were driving through the school parking lot at 90 miles an hour, which was beyond reckless, and you hit somebody and you killed them. Those are some examples that I have there of first degree felonies. I'm really gonna have a hard time fitting here. A second degree felony, okay, where you're between 5 and 10 years, sorry for moving myself around. And those are some examples of things that are considered second degree felonies. Third degree felonies, you have some examples that are listed there, and that's where you can get between 3 to 7 years. If you are able to get something that pled down to just a misdemeanor, let me move myself. And again, every state is different with this. And again, most cases are heard in state court. You only go to federal court if you violated a federal law. We'll give some examples of that in just a minute. But here we see now we're out of the felony range, which is something that you always have to put on any job application that can restrict you from voting or from holding office. Those are some examples of first degree misdemeanors, of second degree misdemeanors, right? And now it's down to 2 to 5 years. Third degree misdemeanors where you can get up to a year, right? Most of the things that are seen in court are much more minor. They're called summary offenses. Let me move myself down here. Okay, like disorderly conduct or loitering, harassment, underage drinking. And that is where you might get up to 90 days in jail, but you're much more likely to not go to jail for just a summary offense. So again, in criminal court, you are charged with a crime, right? It can be a felony. Those are those serious crimes, first, second, third degree felonies. It can be something that is a lesser crime that has less jail time. It's called a misdemeanor. We saw that there's first, second, and third degree misdemeanors. And as well as if something is below a misdemeanor, it's just called a summary offense. All right, now in civil court, okay, again, where we are settling disputes in between parties. And it's same thing, you have a right to a trial by jury in a civil court. I told you I got called for civil court jury duty on November 3rd, and I could have been called for a case that involved an insurance claim, one that dealt for a copyright infringement, and one that dealt for medical malpractice. Okay, those were the three examples. Those were the trials that they were looking for jurors for. The two most common types of civil court, and I'm not turning this into L1, first year of law school, are tort claims, right? A tort is a wrong, right? And this is not a breach of contract. Contract's an agreement that each party has to do something. So a tort is where you wrong somebody and you cause an injury, right? Whether it's property, reputation, or it's an injured person, right? And I gave you some examples there: personal injury, negligence, defamation, medical malpractice, fraud, many others, right? So it'd be like, I gave you $20. We had, you said, I'm going to cut your lawn. And that's a bad example because that's a contract. I messed that up. All right, I'm just going to roll with it. So, all right, let me get a better example. Sorry, you can see this is the first time I've done this for civics. An easy example of a tort is negligence, right? In Mount Lebanon, you have to shovel your sidewalk within 24 hours of the snow falling. And so you don't shovel your sidewalk. You had ample time to shovel your sidewalk. Somebody slips and falls on ice on your sidewalk. They've broken their arm. They're experiencing medical bills, lost wages, pain and suffering. There has been damage, right? And you are sued of the tort of negligence there. So there we go. That's a lot better than my I charged you to cut my lawn and you defrauded me, because that gets a little bit more into a breach of contract. The other common type of civil case is a breach of contract. So you'd say, hey, McCloskey, I'll cut your lawn. If you give me $100 up front, I'll come over and do it every Saturday for 4 weeks. And then you do it the first Saturday, and then you're never there, and my lawn turns into a jungle, right? And then I would bring you to a civil court for a breach of contract. I give you $100 up front. You promised to cut my grass every Saturday. You didn't do that. So, and there's a whole bunch of other types of civil court cases. I mean, the list is almost endless. But I just wanted to show you what some of those looked like, right? Now, what I really want to focus on here is where we talk about jurisdiction, right? When we talk about who has original jurisdiction, that is the court that is going to determine the facts of the case. That is going to make guilt or innocence for the defendant in a case of judgment for the plaintiff or the defendant, right? And so we use the case of Gideon. Remember watching the movie Gideon's Trumpet, right? And so there he was in Pensacola, Florida, and he had broken into the Bay County pool hall, and it was the Bay County court that had the original jurisdiction. That's where his trial was, right? And that's where the six-man jury, Florida has six-man juries. It's really weird stuff, even in a capital crime. It's a six-man jury, six-person jury. And that court had the original jurisdiction on Clarence Earl Gideon and found him guilty of petty larceny. In my case, say I would have been called for the case that involved an insurance claim where somebody was claiming that they should have been paid for, where one person said it was the other insurance company's responsibility to pay them. I was down at the Allegheny County Courthouse. That court would have had the original jurisdiction, if I picked for that trial, whether or not money had to be given to the person whose car was wrecked in the accident. Appellate jurisdiction, all right, does not determine guilt or innocence. It does not make a judgment in a civil case. Guilt or innocence would be criminal, but it looks at the process, right? And we'll look at the different levels of appellate jurisdiction. So when Clarence Gideon went to the Supreme Court, it wasn't, hey, let's put him on trial again and determine whether or not he was actually guilty of breaking into the Bay Harbor pool hall. It was something wrong with the process? And Gideon's part of his appeal was, hey, I had no chance because I didn't have a lawyer, and my constitutional rights were violated. My right to due process was violated because the prosecution had a lawyer and I did not. Okay, state versus federal court. Whether it is civil or federal, whether it is, that should say civil and criminal, in parentheses. So state courts hear cases that concern state laws, and that should say both civil and criminal. Federal courts hear cases that concern federal laws. Most crimes, like if you were to get into a fight with somebody and commit assault, that would be state. Or if you were to commit a robbery, down at the 7-Eleven, those are state crimes. Federal crimes are much more limited and involve things like robbing a bank, or assault on a federal officer, or if your crime crosses jurisdictions and if you kidnap somebody and take them across state lines. Big one that the federal government gets is wire fraud, right? If you are committing any illegal activity and you're sending emails across state lines or mailing something across state lines using the internet, then that all of a sudden becomes federal. The federal government, if you're trafficking in drugs, that can be federal. Certainly anything that has to do with terrorism is federal. So there are, and to try to list it would make your head explode. There are so many things, but it would have to be something that's not covered by the state of Pennsylvania, but is covered by a federal law. Then you would go into federal court. From a civil perspective, if you felt that your civil rights were being violated, such as, you didn't get into a college because you were a woman, and you would say, well, wait a second, that's clearly in violation of Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which says you can't discriminate on the basis of gender in education. I had, 1,500 SAT, I graduated with a 5.4, and, Pitt didn't let me in, and they let guys in that graduated with a 3.2 and a 1,200 SAT. Well, then you would be going to federal civil court, because you would be saying that it was that's a federal statute that is being violated. Okay. I'm going to bring up a diagram, but when you look at the federal court system, you've got 94 district courts, right? We have a federal court down in Allegheny County. And then those district courts, they hear, it's almost all the cases, like 80% of the cases. They have a trial, they have a judge, they have a jury. And again, if you think the process was wrong, you don't get a redo in your trial, then you go to an appellate court. And there are 12 different 12 different circuits for appeals. And then the Supreme Court is handled in the next section, but the Supreme Court would have a final say if they agree to hear you from an appellate court. All federal judges are appointed by the president with Senate confirmation, and they are all appointed for life so that they can be independent. Okay, now for our graphic here. All right, where can I go to get out of the way? How about down here? Okay, so you've got your state court system. Can I get my arrow up here? Yes. Okay, all right, so you've got whether it is civil or criminal, you go to trial in a state court. In our case, it would be down at the courthouse downtown here in Allegheny County. And if they're going to render a guilty or innocent verdict in a criminal case. In a civil case, they are going to find for either the plaintiff or the defendant. And then whether it's criminal or civil, if you feel the process was wrong, like, again, Gideon thought that the state of Florida should have provided him with a lawyer, and it goes to a state appeals court. And then you can petition the state Supreme Court to hear a you can appeal your appellate court decision with the state Supreme Court. And if you disagree with that, then you can, again, only if it's a federal constitutional issue, you can apply to the U.S. Supreme Court. So again, in the case of Clarence Earl Gideon, he tells the judge he wants a lawyer. The judge says, we have ample precedent that only in a capital case does the state provide you with an attorney. The movie didn't show you this, but as he appealed it through the state of Florida said, no, we're following precedent. There was no flaw. You're not entitled to a lawyer unless it's a capital case or unless it's incredibly complex charges. There's special circumstances. And we're basing it on the precedent of Betts versus Brady. Well, Gideon writes the Supreme Court. Remember, he did that handwritten letter and said, I was at a significant disadvantage. I'm going to make the claim that my due process, my right to equal protection under the law was violated in that I did not have a lawyer present during my trial. And the U.S. Supreme Court then made a decision that, yes, we are going to establish a new precedent that all state courts must follow, that said every defendant that goes to trial every defendant is entitled to a lawyer. The same thing happens here over in the federal court system. If you committed a federal crime like a bank robbery, or you were smuggling drugs into the country, you would be tried. You always hear or you lie to the FBI. I was just the movie Richard Jewell, right, was just on TV. That was an FBI investigation. It was a bombing on federal property. It was an act of terrorism. That bomb in the Olympic Park in 1996 in Atlanta. Now, he never went to trial because he was innocent and proven, but he would have gone before a U.S. district court. You hear in the case of some of those trials that involved President Trump and some members, who was it? Was it Michael Cohen? They talked about the Southern District of New York, as there's multiple districts in the state of New York. If you feel as if your constitutional rights were violated, that there was something wrong with the process in which your case was handled, you would go to one of the 12 U.S. appeals court if they agreed to hear your case, and then it would go to the Supreme Court. So again, original jurisdiction is the exact same: civil and criminal, state and federal. They hear your case. They determine in a criminal case, guilty, innocent. In a civil case, the judgment is for the plaintiff or the defendant. The appeals court, whether it's in the state or it's in the U.S. District Court of Appeals, again, will say, was the process fair, right? Were any errors made in the process of how the case was handled? And then you can petition for the state Supreme Court to hear from a state appellate court. You can hear a U.S. District Court to hear a case from a U.S. District Appellate Court. So hopefully that diagram makes some sense. And tomorrow we will be taking a look at the Supreme Court. You're going to move on now and do an activity filling out a Google form about bringing a case to court. Hope that helped out.